Rain had stopped less than an hour earlier, but water still clung to the dead grass surrounding the house. From the street, it looked forgotten. The paint had peeled from the window frames, weeds had swallowed the walkway, and one upstairs curtain hung crooked behind dusty glass. Officer Mason Reed stood beside the front door, listening. "There!" he whispered. A faint sound had come from upstairs. Not a pipe. Not the wind. Something had moved. Behind him, Helen Ward gripped her coat tightly. She was the neighbor who had called police after seeing movement behind the curtain. "I told you," she said. "That house has been empty for years." Mason glanced toward her. "Then somebody needs to explain what we just heard." The door opened with a reluctant groan. The smell hit them first. Old food. Damp fabric. Stale air. Mason entered slowly, flashlight raised. Dust covered the furniture, but the house was not completely abandoned. There were empty cans near the kitchen sink, blankets on the floor, and children's objects scattered across the hallway. "Police!" Mason called. "If anyone is inside, make yourself known." Nothing answered. Then came a small sound from above. A floorboard creaked. Mason and his partner, Officer Lewis, exchanged a look before climbing the stairs. At the end of the hallway stood a closed bedroom door. Mason knocked. "Police! We're here to help." Silence. He opened it. For several seconds, neither officer spoke. A child sat beneath the window, knees pulled against his chest. He was thin, pale, and wearing clothes that looked too small for him. His hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes remained fixed on the officers. Lewis lowered his flashlight. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "You're safe now." The boy did not move. Mason crouched several feet away. "What's your name?" The child stared at him. "Eli," he finally whispered. Mason felt something tighten in his chest. "Eli, where is your mom?" The boy looked toward the bedroom door. "She'll come back." His voice carried no confidence. It sounded like something he had repeated so many times that the words had become a rule. Lewis noticed a plastic cup beside the bed. There was also a stack of empty food containers, and a calendar covered with small pencil marks. "How long have you been here?" he asked. Eli's eyes dropped. He did not answer. Then a woman's voice came from downstairs. "Police? Is everything okay?" Eli reacted instantly. His face changed. He scrambled backward and pressed himself against the wall. "Mom?" Mason turned toward the hallway. "No, Eli. That's our witness." But Eli was already shaking. The reaction disturbed Mason more than the condition of the room. The child had barely responded to two strangers entering his bedroom. Yet one woman's voice downstairs had terrified him. Lewis stepped toward the wall. That was when he saw the drawings. Dozens covered it. Crayon houses. Stick figures. Windows. Beds. A small boy standing alone. And again, the same image appeared. A woman walking through a door. In some drawings, she carried a bag. In others, she was already outside. In every picture, Eli stood behind her. Mason stared at the wall. "Who is that?" he asked. Eli said nothing. Mason pointed gently. "Is that your mother?" The boy nodded. Outside, Helen's voice rose again as she spoke with another officer. Eli covered his ears. Lewis looked at Mason. "We need someone from Child Services," he said quietly. Mason nodded, but his attention remained on the drawings. Then he noticed something beneath the bed. A small cardboard box. He reached 3 years earlier. The house had not yet learned what silence meant. The windows were clean. The front garden was untidy, but alive with weeds and yellow flowers. Toys lay across the living room floor, and a small red jacket hung beside the front door. Mara Carter came home after 6 in the evening carrying 2 grocery bags and a tiredness that seemed heavier than either. "Eli?" A small voice answered from the living room. "Mommy!" He ran toward her. Mara dropped one bag and caught him, smiling despite herself. For a moment, everything she had been thinking about disappeared. "You're home early," she said. "I waited for you." "I know." He pressed his face against her coat. Mara closed her eyes. She loved him. That was the part she never understood how to explain. Loving Eli did not make motherhood easy. Some days, it made everything harder. Bills covered the kitchen counter. Laundry waited beside the washing machine. Her employer wanted overtime. Eli needed new shoes. The refrigerator needed repairs. And every decision seemed to begin with the same question: what about Eli? That question had started to feel like a locked door. After putting him to bed, Mara sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was finally quiet. Her phone vibrated. She almost ignored it. The message was from Daniel Voss. They had met several weeks earlier at work. Daniel was confident without seeming arrogant, funny without trying too hard. When he spoke to Mara, he never looked at her like she was tired. He looked at her like she was interesting. Mara opened the message. "Still awake?" She smiled before she could stop herself. "Unfortunately." "Bad day?" She hesitated. "Long day," Daniel replied almost immediately. "You deserve better than long days." Mara stared at those words. Nobody had said anything like that to her in a long time. Their conversations became a quiet ritual. At first, they talked about work. Then movies, music, childhood memories, and the lives they imagined they might have lived. Daniel asked questions nobody else asked. "What did you want to be before you became a mother?" Mara laughed when she read it. "I don't remember." "Yes, you do." She looked toward the hallway. "I used to want to travel." "Then why don't you?" "Because life happened." Daniel answered, "Life isn't supposed to erase you." That sentence stayed with her. Soon, Mara began hiding her phone whenever Eli entered the room. She waited until he slept before answering Daniel's messages. She knew something was changing. She also knew she was letting it happen. Daniel became the place where Mara could temporarily forget the bills, the exhaustion, and the constant responsibility. Around him, she wasn't someone's mother. She was simply Mara. Their first kiss happened after work in a parking lot beneath a broken street lamp. Neither mentioned it afterward. They didn't need to. The affair deepened quietly, almost comfortably, as if both of them were pretending there had been no choice involved. Then Daniel began asking about her home life. "Does Eli's father help?" "No." "Family?" "Not much." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You do everything alone?" "Mostly." Mara expected sympathy. Instead, Daniel smiled. "You shouldn't have to." Those words frightened her because she wanted to believe them. One evening, they sat together in Daniel's car while rain tapped against the windshield. He turned toward her. "You never talk about your son." Mara looked away. "What's there to say?" "Plenty, probably." She watched rainwater crawl down the glass. Then she whispered the sentence that would eventually become the first confession of a secret she could no longer control. She wished she had not said it. "Because I don't want him to ruin this." The sentence she had spoken in Daniel's car did not disappear when the rain stopped. It followed Mara home. Eli's shoes beside the door. His drawings on the refrigerator. His small voice calling whenever she entered another room. Yet Daniel's messages made leaving feel easier. One Friday afternoon, Mara packed an overnight bag. "Where are you going?" Eli asked. "To see someone from work." "When will you come back?" "Tomorrow." She filled the refrigerator and placed bottled water on the kitchen counter. Then she knelt beside Eli and spoke carefully. "You're going to stay here tonight. Don't open the door for anyone." "Why?" "Because Mommy needs to work." It was the first lie. Mara kissed his forehead and walked toward the door. Eli followed her. "Can I come?" She stopped. Instead, she turned around. "Be a good boy. I'll be back tomorrow." Daniel was waiting for her. They spent the evening together, and for several hours Mara felt almost weightless. There was no bedtime routine, no laundry, no questions about bills. When morning came, Daniel looked at her. "You could stay another night." Mara hesitated. "I need to go home." "You always say that." She looked down at her phone. 3 missed calls from Eli. Guilt rose inside her. Then Daniel touched her hand. "Just one more night." Mara switched the phone to silent. One night became 2. When she finally returned home, Eli was sitting near the window. "Did you have fun?" he asked. Mara nodded. "I was working." After that, Mara discovered how easily a lie could grow. When a coworker asked about Eli, she said he was staying with her aunt. When a neighbor mentioned not seeing him, Mara said her mother had taken him for a while. When Daniel asked whether someone was watching the boy, Mara said everything was arranged. Only one thing remained constant. Eli was still alone. Mara began leaving more supplies behind. Canned food, bread, water, clothes, a small radio. She told herself that meant she was taking care of him. The truth was harder to face. She was making abandonment sustainable. Daniel did not question her deeply at first. He believed the story about relatives because believing it allowed him to remain inside the life they were building. Their apartment became Mara's preferred world. Back at the house, Eli began counting. He found a pencil and drew one line on the wall for every day his mother did not come home. At first, he counted carefully. 7, 8, 9. Then the marks became a calendar. He stopped asking neighbors for help because his mother had warned him never to open the door. He stopped calling her phone after repeated unanswered attempts. Every car outside made him hope. Every set of footsteps made him sit upright. Every silence taught him something new. Mara returned less often. Each visit became shorter. She avoided looking at the marks on the wall. She began telling herself the arrangement was temporary. That word became her refuge. But tomorrow kept moving farther away. Daniel noticed her hesitation whenever she mentioned home. "You're thinking about him again," he said. Mara forced a smile. "It's nothing." Daniel leaned back. "You said this was going to be different." "I know." Neither spoke about it, but both understood that something had already changed beyond repair. Mara knew she should leave, yet she stayed beside him, ignoring the growing weight inside. One evening, after her longest absence yet, Mara unlocked the front door. "Eli?" No answer. She found him sitting on the floor of his bedroom. He looked older. Mara knelt beside him. "I'm sorry." Eli looked at her. He only looked toward the door. Then he quietly asked, "Are you leaving again?" Mara felt the question like a blow. For the first time, she understood that Eli was no longer waiting for her to keep a promise. He was preparing for her to break it. The question Eli had asked stayed with Mara long after she drove away. "Are you leaving again?" She told herself she had not abandoned him. She had simply needed space. She needed Daniel. She needed a life that did not revolve around emergencies, bills, and a child who depended on her for everything. Within weeks, Mara was spending most nights at Daniel's apartment. Her clothes filled one drawer, then 2. Her toothbrush appeared beside his. A framed photograph of the 2 of them sat on the kitchen shelf. It looked like a new beginning. For Mara, that was enough. Daniel was careful at first. He knew she had a son, but he believed Eli was staying with Mara's family. One evening, while they were eating dinner, he asked, "When is Eli coming back?" Mara's fork stopped. "He's fine. That wasn't my question. He's with my family." Daniel studied her face. "For how long?" Mara sighed. "I don't know." The answer changed something. Daniel had expected a simple explanation, but Mara's defensiveness made him suspicious. He did not know the truth yet, but he could sense that the story she had given him had cracks. Mara noticed his expression and immediately regretted saying anything. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You said this was temporary." "It is." "Then why does it keep getting longer?" Mara pushed her plate away. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm asking because I care about you." "No." "You're asking because you want everything simple." Daniel said nothing. Mara stood and carried her plate to the sink. Behind her, Daniel quietly said, "I thought we were building a life together." The words sounded loving, but Mara heard something else inside them. An expectation. A warning. From that night forward, whenever Eli came up, Daniel described him less as a child and more as a problem that had followed Mara into their relationship. "He needs constant attention. You can't keep running back every time he needs something. You deserve a life too." Each sentence sounded reasonable alone. Together, they became permission. Mara began repeating them inside her own head. Maybe Eli really was better without her. Maybe she was too unstable. Maybe another family could give him the stability she never could. That explanation allowed her to sleep. It was easier than admitting she was choosing herself over him every single day because nobody was forcing her. Back at the house, Eli created rules of his own. He counted cans before opening them. He watched the same television programs because familiar voices made the rooms feel less empty. At night, he carried a blanket downstairs and slept near the front door. He wanted to hear the lock turn. Sometimes headlights crossed the ceiling, and he would sit upright, convinced she had finally returned. Then the light disappeared. Silence followed. Eli began measuring time by television shows, daylight, meals, and the sounds of cars outside. He stopped asking when Mara would come home. Instead, he listened. Mara occasionally returned with groceries and supplies. She spoke quickly, avoided his eyes, and left before he could ask questions. Each visit became shorter. Each departure became easier for her. One afternoon, Daniel watched Mara prepare a bag. "You're going there again?" "Yes." "You don't have to." "I know." Daniel looked at her. "You could stay." Mara hesitated. That hesitation was enough. She put the bag down. At that moment, she chose Daniel again. Later that evening, while Mara sat beside him on the couch, her phone vibrated. The message came from an old acquaintance who had known her before everything changed. "Hey, when are you bringing Eli around again? I haven't seen him in forever." Mara stared at the screen. For several seconds, she imagined answering honestly. Then she deleted the message. The screen went dark. And with it disappeared one more opportunity for someone to ask where the child really was. The message disappeared from Mara's phone, but the consequences of her silence remained inside the house she had stopped calling home. 3 years passed in pieces. Eli was 4 when Mara first left him alone. By the time he was 7, the house had become his entire universe. He knew every sound it made. At night, the wooden stairs sometimes creaked for no reason, and Eli would whisper, "Mom?" Nothing answered. So he began answering himself. Sometimes he called the lamp Mr. Light. The television became old friend. A stuffed rabbit from his childhood became Daniel, although Eli did not know anyone by that name. He created conversations because silence was unbearable. "Did Mommy come today?" "Yes." What did she say? She said she loved you. Eli would pause. Then he would answer in his own voice. Okay. It was easier to invent his mother's words than accept that she had stopped saying them. His body grew taller. His clothes became smaller. His handwriting changed. The marks on the wall multiplied. Mara still returned, but never predictably. She brought canned food, bread, water, soap, batteries, and clothes. She told herself that because Eli had supplies, he was surviving. But she never stayed long. She avoided looking at the places where he slept. She avoided the drawings. Most of all, she avoided the questions. One afternoon, Eli asked, "Why don't you sleep here?" Mara froze. "I have work." "You can sleep here." "I can't." "Why?" She turned toward the door. "Because I have to go." Eli watched her leave without crying. That frightened her more than tears would have. Meanwhile, Daniel began noticing contradictions. Mara said Eli was staying with her aunt. Then she said her mother had taken him. Later, she said another relative was helping. Daniel remembered the names changing. One evening he asked, "Which one is it?" Mara looked up from her phone. "What?" "Who is taking care of Eli?" "My family." "That's not an answer." She frowned. "You're asking too many questions." Daniel stared at her. "I've been asking the same question for months." Mara stood. "Why does it matter?" "Because he's your son." The room became silent. Daniel had never sounded angry when speaking about Eli before. Now something had changed. Mara crossed her arms. "He's fine." "You don't know that?" "Yes, I do." "How?" She had no answer. Daniel watched her carefully, noticing unexplained trips, supplies in her car, and how frightened she seemed after visiting the old house. Then, one night, he found a receipt in her bag. Canned food. Children's clothing. Bottled water. The purchase was from the same neighborhood where Mara's old house stood. Daniel held the receipt between two fingers. "What is this?" Mara stared at it. "Nothing." "Don't lie to me." She looked away. Daniel's voice lowered. "Is Eli there?" Mara remained silent. That silence answered him. Daniel stepped backward. "No." Mara closed her eyes. "Daniel, you told me he was with your family. I didn't know what else to say. Is he there?" Her breathing became uneven. Finally, she whispered, "Yes." Daniel stared at her. "For how long?" Mara's eyes filled with tears. "He's been there." "You mean alone?" She did not respond. Daniel's face changed. "You left a child alone?" "I went back." "When?" "Whenever I could." "That isn't what I asked." Mara sank onto the couch. "I brought food." Daniel looked horrified. "You left him alone." "I didn't mean for it to become this." "How could you not mean it?" "You kept doing it." Mara covered her face. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Losing everything." Daniel looked toward the door, aware that the life he had been protecting was built around a secret. He thought about calling the police. He imagined detectives asking how long he had known. He imagined Mara being arrested. He imagined his own name appearing beside hers. His fear became another chain. He whispered, "How long?" Mara looked at him through trembling fingers. "Almost 3 years." And for the first time, Daniel understood that whatever happened next could not be undone. Daniel's silence had become a crime of its own, but nobody knew that yet. Back in the present, Detective Mason Reed stood inside the abandoned house, looking at the calendar marks and drawings covering Eli's bedroom wall. The discovery had changed the case. This was no longer a story about a child who had been forgotten for a few days. Someone had left him here for years. Outside, Helen Ward waited beneath the porch roof, while rainwater dripped from the gutters. She had lived across the street long enough to remember when the house was occupied. Mason approached her with a notebook.
"You knew the family?" "I knew the mother,"
Helen said.
"Mara. She used to come and go all the time." "How long ago?"
3 years.
"Maybe a little more."
Helen looked toward the upstairs window.
"She had a little boy. Eli."
Mason nodded.
"When did you last see him?"
Helen frowned.
"That's what bothers me. I don't remember seeing him leave."
The answer made Mason pause. Helen explained that Mara had once seemed exhausted but ordinary. She carried groceries, rushed to work, and sometimes stood outside while Eli played in the yard. Then things changed. Mara stopped appearing regularly. The curtains stayed closed. Newspapers collected near the steps. The garden became overgrown.
"I thought they moved,"
Helen said.
"Did you ever see anyone inside?" "Not for a long time. Until recently."
Helen nodded.
"A few months ago, I saw movement upstairs." "What kind of movement?" "A curtain. Just for a second."
She had dismissed it at first. Then she saw it again. That was when she began watching the house. Mason returned inside and joined Lewis, who was reviewing records on a tablet.
"We pulled the utility history," Lewis said. "Power never completely shut off." "How much activity?" "Very little, but enough to prove someone was occasionally there."
They found supermarket purchases made near the neighborhood. Most were small transactions: canned food, bottled water, children's clothes, soap, batteries. The dates were scattered, but they formed a pattern. Someone had been returning. Surveillance footage from a nearby store showed a woman matching Mara's description entering several times. Investigators also found older traffic camera images showing the same vehicle approaching the neighborhood late at night. Mason felt the case tightening around a single question. Who else knew? Then Helen remembered something.
"There was a man."
Mason looked up.
"What man?" "He came late at night. I saw him near Mara's house."
"When?"
"Several months before you arrived." "Can you describe him?" Helen closed her eyes, searching her memory.
Tall. Dark jacket. He stood near the driveway and kept looking toward the upstairs window. "Did you speak to him?"
"No.
But I saw his face when he turned."
Mason showed her several photographs. Helen studied them. Then her finger stopped.
"That one."
"Daniel Voss." The name meant little to Mason at first. But when investigators checked Daniel's connection to Mara, the picture changed. Phone records showed repeated contact. Financial records placed him near the neighborhood. Surveillance footage placed his vehicle close to the house. Mason stared at the evidence. For 3 years, someone had known Eli was there. Someone had seen the house. Someone had walked away. The investigators located Daniel that evening. 2 officers approached him outside his apartment building.
"Daniel Voss?"
He turned.
"Yes. We need you to come with us." "Why?" "You're not under arrest."
Daniel's face tightened.
"What's this about?"
Mason stepped forward.
"We'd like to ask you about Mara Carter."
Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Then Mason added the words that made the color leave his face.
"And about her son."
Daniel said nothing. He looked toward the waiting police car, knowing the past had finally caught up with him. He simply looked toward the police car. The secret he had buried for almost 3 years was finally waiting for him inside the interrogation room. The interrogation room was colder than Daniel expected. He sat beneath a fluorescent light, hands folded on the table, staring at the 2 detectives across from him. Mason placed a photograph in front of him.
"Do you know this house?"
Daniel looked at it.
"No."
The answer came too quickly. Lewis opened a folder.
"You're sure?"
"Yes."
"Have you ever been there?"
"No." Mason watched him carefully. Then explain why your phone connected to a tower 2 blocks from this property 17 times over the last 3 years. Daniel swallowed. I don't remember. You don't remember 17 visits? I said I don't remember. Mason slid another document across the table. Bank records. Fuel purchases. A grocery receipt. The dates matched. The neighborhood matched. And then came surveillance photographs showing Daniel's vehicle near the house. Daniel stared at the evidence. His confidence began disappearing. You told us you didn't know the location, Mason said. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I knew where Mara used to live. Used to? Yes. But you visited repeatedly. I was meeting Mara. Where? Daniel said nothing. Lewis leaned forward. Was Eli inside that house? Daniel closed his eyes. For several seconds, the only sound was the hum of the lights. Finally, he whispered, Mara told me. Mason remained still. Told you what? That Eli was there. How old was he? I don't know. He was 4 when this started. Daniel looked down. She said she was handling it. Handling what? Everything. Daniel remembered the first night he learned the truth. Mara had stood in their kitchen, trembling, while he asked questions she refused to answer. He had wanted to believe there was some explanation that would make the situation less terrible. Instead, he accepted every excuse she offered because accepting them meant he could remain beside her. That decision followed him into every quiet morning afterward, becoming something he could never confess without destroying the life he had protected. For years, he had called it fear. Now it sounded more like a choice all along. Mason's voice hardened. You knew a child was alone. Daniel shook his head. I never wanted him harmed. That isn't the question. I cared about him. You never called police. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mara said she'd leave me. Lewis stared at him. So you chose her. Daniel looked away. She said I was trying to destroy her life. She said if I told anyone, she'd disappear. And that stopped you? I was afraid. Of Mara? Of losing everything. The word sounded weak even to Daniel. He feared arrest. He feared humiliation. He feared losing his apartment, his job, and the future he had imagined with Mara. Most of all, he feared admitting what he had become. Mason pushed the photograph closer. A child was living alone for years. I know. And you knew. Yes. Then understand this. You don't get to call yourself innocent because you weren't the one who left him there. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I thought she'd go back. How many times? I don't know. Enough to become normal? Daniel said nothing. Silence settled over the room. Mason let it remain. Sometimes guilt became visible only when nobody gave it an escape. Finally, Daniel spoke again. There was something else. Mason looked up. What? Daniel's hands began shaking. Mara went back. When? Just before you found Eli. How long before? Daniel hesitated. Several days. Mason leaned forward. You're certain? Daniel nodded. She told me she was going to the house. What did she take? Food. Clothes. Some water. And she saw Eli? Yes. Did she speak to him? Daniel looked toward the floor. Yes. Mason exchanged a glance with Lewis. Until that moment, they had believed Mara's disappearance from the house was part of an older pattern. Now they knew something far more disturbing. She had been there. She had seen her son. She had walked away again. And somewhere inside the house, Eli had been waiting for a mother who had already decided to leave him behind. Mara was found the following morning. Detectives located her leaving a small apartment building on the edge of town. She carried a handbag in one hand and a paper cup in the other, looking less like someone being hunted than someone expecting another ordinary day.
Mara Carter?
She stopped. When the officers identified themselves, her face went pale.
Is Eli okay?
It was the first question she asked. Mason noticed what she did not ask. She did not ask where Eli was. She did not ask whether he had been hurt. She asked whether he was okay. At the station, Mara sat beneath the same harsh lights that had exposed Daniel's lies. She kept staring at the tabletop, rubbing her thumb against a faint scratch in the surface. For several minutes, she said nothing. The clock on the wall continued ticking, each second making the silence feel heavier than the questions waiting to be asked. Then she began explaining quietly.
I never planned for this to happen.
Mason watched her.
What did you plan?
To come back.
When?
I don't know.
You left your 4-year-old son alone.
I know.
For almost 3 years.
I know. Mara's voice cracked.
But I went back.
She described the food, bottled water, clothes, medicine, and household supplies she had left behind.
Each item became part of her defense, as though survival necessities could somehow transform abandonment into care.
I never wanted him to starve. But you knew he was alone. Yes. And you kept leaving.
Mara lowered her eyes.
Daniel made everything harder. How? He said I needed to choose my life. He said I couldn't keep running back.
Mason leaned forward.
Did Daniel physically stop you? No. Threaten you? Not exactly.
Then why blame him?
Mara's expression hardened.
Because he knew how to make me feel guilty.
She described arguments, tears, promises, and the fear that Daniel would leave if she returned to the house too often. She claimed that every decision became another compromise. One night away. Then another. A week. Then longer.
I kept thinking I would fix it tomorrow,
she whispered. Mason opened a folder. The records told a different story. Utility activity showed long gaps. Store purchases became less frequent. Phone records revealed weeks when Mara never contacted the house. He placed the timeline before her.
These aren't compromises, Mara.
She stared at the dates.
They show a pattern.
Mara's hands began trembling.
I was trying to survive. So was Eli.
She looked up. Mason placed a photograph on the table. It had been taken shortly after officers found Eli. Mara stared at it. The room seemed to become silent around her. Eli looked small beneath the hospital blanket.
His eyes were uncertain. His hair was unwashed, and his thin hands rested stiffly in his lap. Mara covered her mouth.
No.
She picked up the photograph.
No, that's not.
Her voice disappeared.
This is what they found?
Mason nodded. Mara began crying.
I didn't know. You knew he was alone. I didn't know he looked like that. That distinction doesn't change what happened.
She lowered the photograph. For several seconds, she looked like a mother remembering her child instead of a woman defending herself. Then Mason asked the question she had avoided for 3 years.
Why didn't you call anyone?
Mara stared at him.
Because I was afraid. Of what?
She swallowed.
That if I admitted what I'd done, there would be no way back.
Mason held her gaze.
You weren't afraid there was no way back.
Mara said nothing.
You were afraid someone would make you go back.
The words landed harder than any accusation. Mara looked down at Eli's photograph. And for the first time, she understood that the door she had spent 3 years walking through had never been locked. She had simply kept choosing to leave. The words from Mara's interrogation did not end the investigation. They widened it. Until that moment, detectives had been trying to determine which of the two adults was lying more. After comparing their statements, they realized the more disturbing truth was that both were telling pieces of the truth while protecting themselves from the rest. Mara said Daniel had pressured her. Daniel said Mara had manipulated him. Neither explanation was complete. Investigators reconstructed their relationship through messages, photographs, phone records, bank transactions, and witness statements. The pattern became clearer with every piece of evidence. Mara had first convinced Daniel that Eli was being cared for by relatives. She changed the story whenever he asked questions, sometimes saying her mother had taken him, sometimes claiming another family member was helping. Daniel accepted those explanations because they allowed him to remain with Mara. But eventually, he learned the truth. And even then, he stayed silent. Detectives found messages showing how Mara had used Daniel's fear of losing her against him.
"You don't understand,"
she had written during one argument.
"If you make me choose, I'll leave."
Another message came minutes later.
"I finally have a chance at a normal life."
Daniel had responded that he wanted her to be happy. Those words became important to investigators. Daniel had not ordered Mara to abandon Eli. He had not locked her inside the apartment or physically prevented her from returning home. Instead, he repeatedly reinforced the idea that their relationship required sacrifices. When Mara talked about Eli, Daniel reminded her that she deserved freedom. When she said she felt guilty, he told her guilt would destroy everything they had built. When she considered returning home, he asked whether she was willing to give up their future. None of those statements sounded like a command. Together, they formed pressure. But investigators found something else. Mara had opportunities to end the situation. She could have called her mother. She could have contacted a neighbor. She could have asked social services for help. She could have called police. She did none of those things. Instead, she bought groceries, returned occasionally, and maintained the lie. Daniel's silence became equally significant. He had known the truth for years. He knew Eli was alone. He knew Mara's visits were becoming less frequent. He knew the boy was growing older inside the same house. Yet he continued living beside Mara, as though the secret could remain hidden forever. Detective Mason studied the evidence late into the night. The case no longer looked like one person abandoning a child. It looked like two adults building a wall around a terrible truth, each expecting the other to carry the responsibility. Mara blamed Daniel. Daniel blamed Mara. And Eli had been trapped between them. The question became impossible to avoid. Who had abandoned Eli first? Was it the mother who walked out of the house? Or was it the adults, who knew he was there and chose silence? Mason ordered investigators to examine every message exchanged between Mara and Daniel during the final weeks. Near midnight, Lewis found something. A series of deleted messages had been recovered. The conversation began with Mara asking whether Daniel was still awake. He answered yes. Then Mara wrote that she had been thinking about the house. Daniel told her not to go. Mara replied that she had to check on Eli. Minutes later, another message appeared.
"I can't keep doing this,"
Daniel answered.
"Then don't."
There was a long gap. Then Mara sent one final message.
"If anyone finds him, everything we've built is over."
Mason read the sentence twice. The room became silent. For 3 years, they had treated Eli as a secret that could be postponed. Now the evidence suggested something worse. They had known exactly what they were hiding. And now, for the first time, detectives understood that discovery had always been their greatest fear. The courtroom drama begins to fade into something quieter, and in that silence, Eli becomes the center of the story. The rescue may have ended his physical isolation, but it did not erase the years that shaped him. In the days that follow, doctors, social workers, and unfamiliar adults surround him with questions and careful kindness. They ask whether he is hungry. They ask whether he is cold. They ask whether he is afraid. Eli rarely answers. He watches them instead. When someone offers him food, he hesitates before taking it. When a blanket is placed around his shoulders, he looks at the person who brought it as if he is waiting for a condition that never comes. Even simple gestures of care seem to confuse him. To everyone around him, these moments are heartbreaking. To Eli, they are simply unfamiliar. He has spent so long learning that people disappear that he no longer expects anyone to stay. A child psychologist assigned to his case explains that Eli's behavior should not be mistaken for ordinary shyness. His mind adapted to an environment where trust was dangerous and uncertainty was constant. He learned to make his world smaller because a smaller world was easier to understand. If nobody promised anything, nobody could break a promise. If nobody came close, nobody could suddenly leave. The psychologist says Eli survived by creating rules that gave him a sense of control. He did not need to understand why adults behaved the way they did. He only needed to understand what happened next. Now, however, everything has changed. There are voices outside his room. There are people checking on him. There are meals arriving at regular times. There are questions about school, family, sleep, and memories. Everyone wants to help him return to a normal life. But Eli does not yet know what normal means. For him, normal was waiting. Normal was listening. Normal was expecting footsteps that might never come. While Eli begins the slow process of learning how to exist around other people, Mara is facing a very different kind of aftermath. The courtroom has stripped away the illusion she once used to justify her choices. Daniel's testimony has exposed more than his own involvement. It has revealed how deeply both of them became trapped inside decisions they once believed they could control. Mara listens as the evidence turns against her, and for perhaps the first time, she cannot change the direction of events. The relationship she sacrificed so much to protect is collapsing in front of her. Daniel, meanwhile, is forced to confront his own responsibility. His testimony may explain his actions, but explanation does not erase consequence. Every detail he provides makes the story harder to escape. They once believed they were running from responsibility. Now responsibility has found them, and it has brought them to opposite sides of the same courtroom. But outside that courtroom, Eli's recovery continues in smaller, quieter moments. One afternoon, the psychologist sits with him and places a family photograph on the table. She does not push him. She simply waits. Eli looks at the picture for several seconds. His expression changes almost imperceptibly. His eyes move across the faces, stopping on one person longer than the others. The psychologist gently asks if he remembers his mother. Eli does not answer. The room becomes still. She gives him time, understanding that memory cannot always be forced into words. Eli continues staring at the photograph, holding on to something buried beneath years of confusion, fear, and silence. The people around him understand that the sentence carries more weight than it seems to. Eli is not describing a simple memory. He is describing the pattern by which he learned to measure love, absence, and hope. Someone leaving was not necessarily the end, because sometimes that person returned. That small expectation may have been one of the few things that kept him connected to the idea of another person. The psychologist does not correct him or ask what happened next. She lets the silence remain, because for Eli, silence is no longer something that must be filled. Across town, the legal proceedings continue without him. Arguments are made, evidence is reviewed, and consequences move closer. But for Eli, the next chapter will not be decided by a verdict. It will begin with learning that someone can leave the room and still come back. That changes his world. Then, after a long pause, he finally speaks. She used to come back. The silence that follows Eli's final words does not end the story. Instead, it carries directly into the final stage of the case, where the questions are no longer only about what happened to him, but about who allowed it to happen and why. The courtroom now turns toward consequences.
Mara and Daniel face separate scrutiny as investigators carefully reconstruct the decisions that brought the family to this point. Every statement is compared with earlier evidence. Every timeline is examined. The distinction matters. What Mara knew is different from what Daniel knew. What either of them intended is different from what they actually did. And what they failed to do becomes just as important as their deliberate choices. For the investigators, the story is not a simple matter of assigning blame to two people and closing a file. It is a chain of decisions, each one creating room for the next. Mara wanted a new life. Daniel wanted to preserve their relationship. But Eli had never asked for either of those things. He wanted his mother to come home. That difference becomes the emotional center of the final proceedings. The court can establish responsibility. It can impose consequences. It can acknowledge the harm caused by abandonment and neglect. But no verdict can return the years Eli spent waiting. No sentence can give him back birthdays that passed without celebration, ordinary mornings that never happened, or the simple comfort of believing that someone would always return. Justice can answer what people did. It cannot undo what they lost. As the case moves toward its conclusion, the narration steps back from the individuals and looks at the larger pattern. The tragedy did not begin with one enormous decision. It developed gradually, through hundreds of smaller choices that seemed easier to justify at the time. A lie told to avoid an argument. A delay that became another delay. A warning that was ignored. A responsibility pushed onto someone else. A silence that lasted longer than it should have. Each choice created another opportunity to stop what was happening. Each opportunity passed. That is what makes the ending so difficult to accept. There was not necessarily one moment when everything became irreversible. There were countless moments when someone could have chosen differently. Mara could have spoken. Daniel could have stopped protecting the relationship. Someone could have asked where Eli was. Someone could have insisted that he deserved better. Instead, the silence continued until Eli learned to live inside it. When the legal proceedings finally moved toward their conclusion, the story refuses to frame justice as revenge. The consequences matter, but they are not presented as a perfect correction to everything that happened. Punishment may close one chapter, but healing is something Eli will have to build slowly, long after the courtroom doors close. Perhaps that is the question the case leaves behind. Not simply who was guilty, or what punishment was deserved, but how ordinary choices can become devastating when nobody decides to stop. Eli's story is a reminder that children understand absence differently. They understand whether someone comes when they call, whether a promise is kept, and whether home feels safe. Those memories may follow him, but they do not have to define his future. There can still be people who stay, people who listen, and people who teach him. The final scene returns to the old house. It is almost unrecognizable now. The rooms have been emptied. Furniture is gone. The curtains have been removed, leaving the windows exposed to the pale daylight. The walls look larger without the objects that once filled them. There are no voices. No footsteps. No unanswered questions hanging in the air. Only silence. A worker walks through the hallway, removing the last remaining items. Eli's drawings have already been taken down, stacked carefully and preserved as part of the things that can still be saved. Then the camera stops. One small drawing remains on the wall. It is simple, the kind of picture a child might make without thinking about symbolism. 3 figures stand beneath a bright yellow sun. A child, an adult man, and a woman. But the woman has no face. The image says what the courtroom never could. Eli remembered the idea of a family, even when the family itself had become something he could no longer trust. The camera lingers on the drawing. The house is empty, but the question remains. How many times can someone walk away before leaving becomes abandonment?